My husband's body wasn't even cold when his brother started circling. I was still in my funeral dress, black silk that scratched against my neck. Like guilt I didn't deserve to feel, sitting in our front room with a cup of tea gone stone cold on the side table. October rain drummed against the windows of our California ranch house, the kind of steady, relentless sound that makes you feel like the world is closing in. The guests were still murmuring in the hallway, a sea of dark suits and casseroles wrapped in foil, when Robert pulled a chair too close to mine. He was Percival's younger brother, 50-something with the kind of face that looked successful. Expensive haircut, Rolex that caught the light, that practiced concerned expression men wear when they're about to ask for something. He leaned in, dropping his voice to that conspiratorial whisper men use when they think they're doing a woman a favor. "Dorothea," he said, "we need to talk about the house, about the power of attorney. Did Percival ever update the paperwork?" I looked at him like he'd spoken in a language I hadn't heard in decades. My mind was still foggy from the funeral service, from the organ music that had seemed too loud, from the scent of lilies that was already making the house smell like a mausoleum. "The house?" I repeated. Robert nodded, his expression shifting into something that might have passed for sympathy if you didn't look too closely. "Just being practical, Dorothea. Given everything Percival mentioned about your health lately, we want to make sure you're taken care of, legally speaking." My health. The words hung in the air between us like smoke. "What did he say about my health?" I asked. Robert glanced toward the hallway where voices still murmured. "Just that you'd been forgetful, that he was worried. Look, we don't need to get into this now. My husband has been in the ground less than 5 hours, I said quietly. The dirt is still fresh. Robert had the decency to look uncomfortable. Of course, I'm sorry. We'll talk later, when you're feeling better." He patted my hand, actually patted it like I was a child, and stood up. I watched him walk away, watched him whisper something to his wife by the door. She looked at me with that particular expression, the one that said, "Poor thing, she doesn't understand." But here's the truth no one knew, the truth I hadn't even fully admitted to myself until that moment. I wasn't devastated. I wasn't lost. I felt something else entirely, something that scared me because I couldn't name it yet. That evening, when the last car had finally pulled away and the quiet came crashing back into the house, I didn't go to bed. I walked the length of the hallway like a stranger in my own life. I looked at the rugs I had vacuumed for 40 years, the heavy curtains I had sewn myself in 1983, the chipped mug on the counter that Percival hated because it didn't match the set. It all looked the same, yet it felt different, hollow, almost echoing. I was still in that black dress, my feet aching in heels I never wore except for weddings and funerals. And without really planning to, my body took me to the one door I had never been allowed to touch in 52 years of marriage. His office. It had always been locked. Always. In the early years, he told me it was because of patient confidentiality. He was a doctor, a specialist in internal medicine, a man of importance. "You wouldn't understand the files, Dottie," he would say, using the nickname I'd grown to hate. "Don't fuss with it." I believed him then because back then I believed that love meant trust, and trust meant not asking questions. But even after he retired 15 years ago, the door stayed locked. He would go in there after dinner, sometimes staying for hours. I would hear him talking to himself, low and rhythmic. Once, maybe 10 years ago, I asked him what he was working on. He turned to me, his face cold and smooth as a stone, and said, "That's not for you, Dorothea. That is my world. You have the rest of the house." I stood in front of that door now. It was plain mahogany with a brass handle that shone under the hallway light. Nothing remarkable except that it was the only part of this house. The house I cleaned, the house I maintained, the house I turned into a home. That didn't belong to me. I pressed my palm against the wood. It was cool to the touch. I tried the handle. Still locked, of course. I could almost hear his voice from the other side. "That's not for you, Dorothea. Go rest, Dorothea. You're confused, Dorothea." How many times had he said that? How many times had he told me my memory was slipping, or that I was overreacting, or that I needed to take one of the pills he prescribed to settle my nerves. The pills. I thought about the pills. The little blue ones for anxiety, the white ones for sleep. The oval yellow ones, he said, would help with my moods. Standing there in the dim hallway, still in my funeral dress, I made a decision. The next morning, I didn't call Robert. I didn't call my children, who were busy with their own lives and their own grief, already on planes back to Oregon and Texas. I went to the kitchen drawer, found my reading glasses, and searched on my phone for a local locksmith. It took me 20 minutes to work up the courage to press call. "Bay Area Lock and Key," a young voice answered. "This is Tommy." "Yes, hello," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need someone to open a door in my house. It's locked and I don't have the key." "Sure thing, ma'am. What's the address?" I gave it to him. He said he could come that afternoon, around 2 o'clock. I thanked him and hung up, my hand shaking as I set the phone down. I made tea I didn't drink. I stood in front of the hallway mirror in my bathrobe and barely recognized the woman staring back. Hair like melted silver, thin lips pressed together, eyes that looked tired but also, and this surprised me, determined. "Who are you?" I wondered. "Who have you become while he was watching you?" At 2 o'clock exactly, the doorbell rang. Tommy Nguyen was younger than his voice suggested, maybe 30, with kind eyes and a toolbox that looked like it had seen some miles. He had the easy manner of someone who'd helped people through locked doors before, literally and maybe metaphorically. "You're Mrs. Wycliffe, Fee?" he asked. "I am." "I'm sorry about your husband, ma'am. I saw the obituary in the paper." "Thank you." He glanced past me toward the hallway. "So which door are we working on?" I led him to the office. He studied the lock, running his fingers over the brass handle, then crouched down to look at the mechanism. "Ma'am, before I open this, I need to ask, do you have proof this is your house? I just need to be careful, with legal stuff." My heart sank. Of course. Of course he would need proof. "I have my driver's license," I said. "It has this address. And I have our marriage certificate in the bedroom. Would that work?" "That should be fine. Just covering my bases." I retrieved the documents, my hands trembling slightly as I handed them over. Tommy looked them over, nodded, and handed them back. "Okay, Mrs. Wycliffe, let's get this open for you." He set to work. I stood behind him, watching his hands move with practiced efficiency. He was talking as he worked, the way some people do when they're concentrating. "This is an old lock. Real old. Commercial grade, actually. The kind they used to use for medical offices back in the 80s, early 90s. See this here?" He pointed to something I couldn't quite see. "There's a secondary bolt mechanism. Someone really didn't want this door opened without the right key." My stomach tightened. "How long will it take?" "Honestly, could be 20, 30 minutes. Maybe longer. This isn't your standard bedroom lock." He glanced up at me. "Ma'am, if you don't mind my asking, your husband locked this and didn't give you a key?" "For 52 years, I heard myself say. Tommy's hands paused. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw something shift in his expression. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. "Okay," he said quietly. "Let's get you in there." It took 23 minutes. I know because I watched the clock in the hallway, watched each minute tick by like a heartbeat. When the lock finally clicked, a sharp metal snap that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet house, I actually jumped. Tommy stood up, wiping his hands on his jeans. "There you go, Mrs. Wycliffe. It's open." I paid him. He gave me his card and told me to call if I needed anything else, anything at all. I could tell he wanted to ask what was behind the door, but he was too polite. Or maybe he already knew that some doors are better opened in private. After he left, I stood in the hallway for a long time. 5 minutes. 10. The door was open now, just a crack, like a wound breathing in the dark. "Go on, the house seemed to whisper. "See what he really thought of you." I pushed the door open. The smell hit me first. Not rot, not mildew. It was the smell of age, of dust and leather and old paper, and something medicinal, like antiseptic that had soured over time. The room was dark, curtains drawn tight against the afternoon sun. I found the light switch and flipped it. The office was immaculate. I don't know what I expected. Chaos, maybe? A genius's mess? But this was terrifying order. A large oak desk sat in the center, its surface clean and cleared except for a single green banker's lamp. Bookshelves lined every wall, filled not with novels or medical textbooks, but with identical black binders. Filing cabinets, 4 of them, commercial grade, stood against the back wall. A leather chair, worn into the shape of him, faced the window. Nothing was out of place. Nothing until you looked closer. He had labeled everything. Every shelf, every binder, every drawer on the filing cabinets. And as I stepped closer, squinting through my reading glasses, I saw the labels. DW, Medical Records 2010-2015. DW, Behavioral Patterns 2016-2020. DW, Financial Monitoring. DW, Correspondence. I stopped breathing. DW, for a confused moment I thought, who is DW? Then it hit me. Dorothea Wycliffe. Me, DW was me. My legs went weak. I reached for the desk to steady myself. This room, this forbidden, locked room, wasn't full of patient files or research or any of the things he'd implied over the decades. It was full of me, files about me, notes about me, records of me. I stood there, my hand gripping the edge of his desk, staring at the wall of black binders bearing my initials. There had to be 50 of them, maybe more. Years and years of what? Observations? Documentation? The room swayed slightly. I sat down heavily in his leather chair. It creaked, a sound I had heard 1,000 times from the other side of this door, but never from this side. Never from his perspective. On the desk, centered perfectly beneath the green lamp, was a cream envelope with my name on it. Dorothea. His handwriting. Neat, controlled, precise, just like the rest of him. My fingers felt stiff as I opened it. There was no letter inside. No I love you. No thank you for the years. No I'm sorry I'm gone. Just a list. A typed sheet of paper titled, Instructions for Dorothea Wycliffe upon my death. I read 1. Contact Robert Wycliffe immediately to handle all financial accounts and estate matters. 2. Do not attempt to access office files or documents. Legal matters will be resolved through the trust. 3. Continue psychiatric treatment as previously arranged with Dr. Bradley. 4. All decisions regarding the estate to be coordinated through executor, Robert Wycliffe. 5. Avoid stress. Focus on routine. Take medications as prescribed. 6. Do not make major decisions without consulting executor. I read it twice, then a third time. Avoid stress. Take medications. Do not attempt to access. It wasn't a farewell. It was a set of orders. Even dead, he was still telling me what to do. Still assuming I would obey. Still treating me like a patient, like a child, like something that needed to be managed. I set the paper down slowly on the desk. Outside, the October rain had stopped, and pale afternoon light was starting to break through the clouds. It slanted through the gap in the curtains, illuminating dust motes in the air, making them look like tiny spirits circling the room. I stood up. I walked to the nearest bookshelf and pulled down the first binder my hand touched. DW, Medications 2019-2024. I opened it. Inside were photocopies of prescriptions, dozens of them. I scanned the pages, my frown deepening with each one I recognized. Anti-anxiety medication, sleep aids, mood stabilizers. There were notes in his handwriting in the margins. Increased dosage if agitation returns. Patient exhibits confusion and emotional volatility. Possible early onset dementia. Monitor closely. Patient. He'd called me a patient. I remembered 2019. That was the year I'd been upset because he'd canceled our anniversary trip without asking me. We were supposed to go to Napa Valley. I'd been looking forward to it for months. And 2 weeks before, he'd just canceled it. Said he needed to help Robert with something, some business thing that couldn't wait. I'd cried. I'd yelled. Actually yelled, which I rarely did. And the next day he'd brought me a glass of water and a small blue pill, telling me I was hysterical and needed to rest. I wasn't hysterical. I was disappointed. I was hurt. But here, in his file, my disappointment had been turned into a diagnosis. I pulled another binder. DW, Correspondence 2018-2020. Inside were letters. My letters. Ones I had written to my childhood friend Sarah Mitchell. Birthday cards I'd sent to my nieces. Even emails, printed out, organized chronologically. All of them had been opened, read, analyzed. Some had notes in red ink circled around specific sentences, concerning tone, mentions sleep disturbances, increase monitoring, questioning my judgment, redirect. He had been reading my mail for years, maybe decades. He had been intercepting my thoughts, analyzing them, grading them like a teacher marking a failed test. I felt sick. A cold, heavy nausea settled in my gut, but underneath it was something else. Something hot and rising. Anger. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt genuinely, deeply angry. I looked around the room with new eyes. This wasn't a study. This wasn't an office. This was a case file, a case he had been building against me, piece by piece, year by year, to prove. To whom? To himself? To the world? That I was incompetent. That I was a subject to be managed, not a partner to be loved. And the most damning thing was that I had helped him. Every time I stayed silent, every time I swallowed my anger, every time I apologized for being difficult, I had handed him another piece of evidence. I stood up. My knees were stiff, but my hands were steady now. The shock had burned off, replaced by something cold and hard and clear. He hadn't left me a letter. He had left me instructions. And for the first time in my entire adult life, I had absolutely no intention of following a single one of them. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the bed we had shared for 52 years, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around me. Every creak sounded different now. Every shadow felt like it was watching. The digital clock on the nightstand blinked 2:47 a.m. in angry red numbers. I kept thinking about the binders, about my name written over and over in his precise handwriting, about the word patient in the margins. At 3:15, I gave up on sleep. I put on my bathrobe and went back to the office. The room looked different in the middle of the night. The green lamp cast strange shadows across the walls, making the rows of binders look like soldiers standing at attention. I walked slowly around the perimeter, reading labels, my anger from earlier replaced by something colder, more calculated. If he'd kept records, there had to be more. Men like Percival, controlling men, methodical men, they didn't leave things half-finished. I started searching. The desk drawers were locked, but the keys were in the top center drawer, another control tactic, I realized. Keep things locked so she knows they're forbidden, but keep the keys accessible so you can access them any time. I opened each drawer systematically. Files, more files, bank statements I'd never seen, investment reports, account numbers for accounts I didn't know existed. In the bottom right drawer, under a stack of medical journals, I found it. A leather-bound notebook. Personal. Handwritten. I pulled it out with shaking hands and opened to a random page. June 12, 2012. Dee forgot to buy milk again this morning. 3rd time this month. Asked her about it. She insisted she thought we had enough. Clear avoidance behavior. Need to monitor more closely. Early signs? I remembered that day. We hadn't needed milk. I'd bought milk 2 days before. Percival had drunk it all, making his protein shakes. But when I'd pointed that out, he'd looked at me with that disappointed expression and said, "Are you sure, Dottie? I don't remember seeing any." I'd doubted myself. I'd actually driven back to the store to buy more milk. I flipped forward. September 14th, 2015. Dee questioned my decision about the car today. I told her the Buick was the better choice. Safer, more reliable. She wanted the Honda, became verbally resistant, argumentative, showed her Consumer Reports data, but she remained oppositional, reinforced need for me to handle major decisions. She eventually agreed but seemed upset. Possible mood instability. The car. I'd wanted the blue Honda Civic. He'd insisted on the beige Buick. I'd given in because he'd made me feel stupid for preferring something impractical. More pages. April 3rd, 2019. Dee's friendship with SM continues to be problematic. Sarah Mitchell encourages independence, dangerous influence. Called SM directly, suggested Dee needs space for her mental health. Successfully redirected. My hand froze on the page. He'd called Sarah. He'd told her to stay away from me. And Sarah, sweet Sarah, who'd been my friend since college, had believed him because he was a doctor, because he was my husband. Because why would he lie? I kept reading, flipping faster now, anger rising with each entry. October 8th, 2021. Dee asked why she doesn't receive bank statements anymore. Told her they're paperless now, easier for me to manage. She seemed confused about finances, suggested she might benefit from reduced access to accounts to prevent errors. She accepted this. January 19th, 2023. Time to formalize plans. R agrees to assist. Everything in place. D suspects nothing. R. Robert. His brother knew, had known, was part of this. I slammed the notebook shut, my heart hammering. The room felt too small suddenly, the walls pressing in. I stood up, paced, tried to breathe. This wasn't a husband study. This was evidence of a crime. A slow-motion crime that had taken decades to unfold. I looked at the filing cabinets. 4 of them, all locked. The keys had to be somewhere. I found them taped to the underside of the middle desk drawer. Of course. Hidden but accessible. Always in control. I opened the first cabinet. More files. These were different. Medical documents, official-looking papers with letterheads from doctors I barely recognized. I pulled out a folder labeled DW, Medical Assessments. Inside was a document that made my blood run cold. Declaration of Incapacity, Dorothea Grace Wycliffe. It was dated 6 months ago, April 2024. I read with growing horror. It claimed I was suffering from severe cognitive decline, that I was unable to manage personal affairs, that I required legal guardianship for her own safety. There were signatures, 3 of them. Dr. Alan Bradley, psychiatrist. Dr. Helen Zhao, neurologist. Dr. James Patterson, internal medicine. All notarized, all official. I'd never met Dr. Bradley. Dr. Zhao had been at a Christmas dinner last year, Percival's colleague, I'd assumed. She'd asked me some odd questions, I remembered now. Do you ever forget where you put your keys? Do you have trouble following conversations? I'd laughed it off, made a joke about getting older. She'd been diagnosing me over roast beef and wine. Dr. Patterson was Percival's golf buddy. I'd seen him maybe twice. None of them had ever examined me. Not formally, not in a medical setting, but they'd all signed a document declaring me mentally incompetent. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the papers. I set them carefully on the desk and kept searching. Behind the Declaration of Incapacity was another document. Last Will and Testament of Percival James Wycliffe. I'd seen Percival's will before, or at least I thought I had. He'd shown me a copy years ago, told me everything was taken care of. I'd never pressed for details. That was another thing I'd learned. Don't press Percival for details. But this was different. This was 20 pages long, dense with legal language. I forced myself to read it, to understand it. It took me 3 tries to get through the first page. The legalese was deliberately confusing, but the core message became clear. All liquid assets, property, and investments to remain in a trust managed by Robert Wycliffe until such time as Dorothea Wycliffe is deemed competent to assume control by a medical board of trustees. Should Dorothea Wycliffe require assisted living due to mental incapacity, the estate shall cover reasonable expenses, provided the guardian, Robert Wycliffe, approves the facility. In the event of proven and sustained mental decline, unused funds shall revert to the family trust for distribution to children and remaining heirs. I read it again and again. He hadn't left me anything. Not really. I could live in the house, but I couldn't own it. I could have my bills paid, but I couldn't access the money. I couldn't make decisions about my own care. I couldn't even choose my own nursing home. Robert would control everything. Robert, who I barely knew. Robert, who'd been circling at the funeral asking about paperwork. The only reason this hadn't been filed yet, the only reason I wasn't already declared incompetent, was because Percival had died first. His heart had given out before he could complete his plan. But Robert still had the documents. Robert was already the executor. Robert was just waiting for the right moment to file them. I felt lightheaded. I sat down hard in the leather chair, the will still clutched in my hands. 52 years. 52 years of marriage, of cooking his meals and washing his clothes and organizing his life. 52 years of being told I was forgetful, confused, too emotional, too sensitive, not capable of understanding complicated matters. And all of it, every single moment, had been leading to this. To him taking everything. To him erasing me completely while making it look like care, like concern, like love. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the sky outside to start turning gray with pre-dawn light. Long enough for my anger to calcify into something harder. Evidence. That's what I needed. Not feelings, not memories. Cold, hard evidence. I stood up and walked back to the filing cabinet. If he'd kept all this, the medical files, the correspondence, the behavioral logs, there had to be more. Men like Percival documented everything. In the back of the second cabinet, behind folders of financial records, I found a velvet curtain thumbtacked to the back panel. I pulled it aside. A wall safe. Brushed steel, medium-sized with an electronic keypad. Of course there was a safe. I tried his birthday. 0418. Error. His mother's birthday, 1109, error. Our wedding anniversary, 0617, error. Damn it. I stepped back, thinking, what would Percival use? What was important enough to him to memorize, to keep close? Not me. Clearly not our marriage. His career, his identity as a doctor. That was what mattered to him. That was what he protected above everything else. I thought about the medical license on the wall in the hallway, the one he'd had framed, displayed prominently for 50 years. Licensed, 1974. I tried, 1974. The safe beeped and clicked. The door swung open. Inside the safe were 3 items. First, another copy of the Declaration of Incapacity. This one had a sticky note on top in Percival's handwriting. Original to be filed with probate after 90 days. 90 days. He'd planned to wait 3 months after his death to file it. Long enough for me to grieve. Long enough for me to seem unstable, confused, unable to handle things. Then Robert would step in as the concerned brother-in-law, and everyone would nod and agree I needed help. Second, a thick envelope labeled Medical Correspondence, Confidential. I opened it. Inside were emails and letters between Percival and the 3 doctors who'd signed the declaration. I read them in the growing dawn light, my stomach churning. From Dr. Alan Bradley, March 15th, 2024. Percival, regarding your wife's situation, I understand your concern. While I typically require a formal examination before providing any clinical opinion, I'm willing to defer to your expertise given your medical background and intimate knowledge of the patient. If you can provide detailed behavioral logs, I can draft an assessment based on your observations. As discussed, I appreciate the patient referrals you've been sending my way. Patient referrals. He'd been trading my mental health diagnosis for business favors. From Dr. Helen Zhao, April 2nd, 2024. Dr. Wycliffe, I've reviewed the behavioral documentation you provided. While the evidence of cognitive decline seems somewhat subjective, I trust your professional judgment. As a colleague and friend, I'm happy to co-sign the assessment. Please do send those referrals we discussed. Somewhat subjective. She'd had doubts, but she'd signed anyway. From Dr. James Patterson, April 10th, 2024. Percy, done. Signed and notarized. Glad I could help. See you at the club on Saturday? I'm buying if you bring those stories from your residency. He'd signed away my freedom for golf stories and drinks. I sat back, the papers scattered across the desk. 3 licensed physicians had conspired to declare me mentally incompetent without ever examining me, based entirely on the word of my husband, who was monitoring me like a lab rat, who was documenting my every move to build a case against me. This wasn't just control. This was systematic, premeditated fraud. The 3rd item in the safe was smaller, a USB drive in a plastic case with a label that read, Archive, 2008-2024. I pulled out the old laptop Percival kept in his office. Apparently this was where he did his documentation, and plugged in the drive. The computer whirred to life. A folder opened automatically. 2,147 image files. I clicked on the first one, not knowing what to expect. It was a photograph of me, standing in our kitchen, stirring something on the stove, wearing my blue cardigan and jeans, hair in a messy bun. The angle was wrong, shot from above, from the side, like someone had taken it from the upstairs window, looking down into the kitchen. I opened another file. Me in the garden, kneeling by the tomato plants, taken from the 2nd floor bedroom window. Another. Me sitting in the living room watching television, hair disheveled, wearing my nightgown. The angle suggested he'd taken it from the hallway, shooting through the partially open door. Another. Me sleeping. I clicked through them faster, my breath coming short. Hundreds of photos. Thousands. Taken over 16 years. Catalogued meticulously by date. He'd been photographing me without my knowledge. Documenting my life like I was an animal in captivity. Building his case, image by image. Look how disheveled she is. Look how confused she appears. Look how she can't even dress properly. But looking at them now, I didn't see a confused woman. I saw a woman doing ordinary things. Cooking, gardening, reading, existing in her own home, never knowing she was being watched. I saw a prisoner who didn't know she was in a cage. The sun was fully up now. Tuesday morning, the day after Percival's funeral. I'd been in this office for nearly 8 hours. I was exhausted. My eyes burned. My head ached. But I was also, for the first time in decades, completely certain of something. I wasn't the one who was sick. I stood up, walked to the window, and opened the curtains wide. Sunlight flooded the room, harsh and revealing. It illuminated every corner of Percival's carefully constructed case against me. Every lie, preserved and catalogued. I pulled out my phone. My hands were steady now. The first call I made was to Sarah Mitchell. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice cautious. Dorothea? Sarah, I said. It's me. I need to tell you something. Can you come over today? A pause. Of course, honey. What's wrong? Everything, I said. And I'm going to need your help fixing it. The second call was harder. I scrolled through my contacts until I found my daughter's number. Evelyn answered cheerfully. Mom, how are you holding up? I need to ask you something, I said, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest. And I need you to be honest with me. Okay? Her tone shifted, uncertain. Did your father tell you I was sick? That I was having memory problems? Silence. Long, damning silence. Evelyn? Mom, her voice cracked. He said you were showing signs of dementia, that you were getting confused, forgetting things. He asked us not to mention it to you because you got upset when he brought it up. When did he tell you this? About 2 years ago. He showed us a journal, things you'd forgotten, conversations you'd had that you didn't remember. He said he was working with doctors to help you. My heart broke and hardened at the same time. Evelyn, honey, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Your father lied. I'm not sick. I've never been sick. He created a false medical record to take control of my assets after his death. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Mom, that's crazy. Dad wouldn't. I'm standing in his office right now, I interrupted. The one he kept locked for our entire marriage. There are 52 binders of files about me in here. Photographs he took of me without my knowledge. Emails between him and doctors who never examined me but signed papers declaring me incompetent. A will that gives your Uncle Robert control of everything. It's all here, Evelyn. Every piece of his plan. I heard her breathing on the other end of the line. Mom, I don't know what to say. I need you to believe me, I said. Can you do that? More silence. Then quietly, let me call Daniel. Let me come out there. Both of us. Can you wait a few days? I can wait, I said. But I'm not waiting to act. After we hung up, I stood in the middle of Percival's office, my office now, and looked at the evidence spread across every surface. Sarah would be here in a few hours. My children would come by the end of the week. But before any of that, I needed someone else. I needed a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. I needed someone who understood what this was. Someone who'd seen this kind of control, this kind of systematic erasure of a woman's autonomy. I picked up my phone again and searched. Elder Abuse Attorney, California. The first result was a firm in San Francisco. The name at the top of the page was Grace Coleman, Isiari. Her bio said she specialized in coercive control, elder financial abuse, and undue influence cases. I called the number. A receptionist answered. Coleman and Associates. My name is Dorothea Wycliffe, I said. I need to speak with Ms. Coleman about my husband's estate. He died 3 days ago, and I've discovered he spent the last decade building a legal case to declare me mentally incompetent so he could control my assets. I have documentation. Thousands of pages. I need help. Hold, please. 30 seconds later, a woman's voice came on the line. Mrs. Wycliffe, this is Grace Coleman. Tell me everything. So I did. I stood in that room full of evidence, full of my husband's lies, and I told her everything. The locked door, the binders, the photographs, the doctors, the declaration, the will, all of it. When I finished, Grace was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Mrs. Wycliffe, can you bring everything to my office tomorrow morning? Every file, every photo, every piece of paper. Don't leave anything behind. I can do that. Good, because we're going to bury them. I hung up the phone and looked around the office one more time. The morning sun made everything look stark and clear. No more shadows, no more locked doors. I walked to the desk and picked up the list of instructions Percival had left me. The one that started with contact Robert immediately. I tore it in half, then in quarters, then into tiny pieces until it was nothing but confetti in my hands. No, I said aloud to the empty room. To his ghost, if it was listening. To myself. Not this time. I had work to do. Sarah arrived at noon with 2 bottles of wine and a look on her face I hadn't seen in years. The old Sarah, the one who'd driven cross-country with me in 1975, the one who'd helped me move into my first apartment, the one who told Percival at our wedding that if he ever hurt me, she'd make him regret it. Somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten that Sarah, or maybe Percival, had made me forget. She stood in the doorway of the office, taking it all in. The binders, the files scattered across the desk, the USB drive still plugged into the laptop, frozen on an image of me watering plants, unaware I was being watched. Jesus Christ, she whispered. I know. She walked slowly into the room, touching nothing, just looking. When she reached the wall of binders with my initials, she ran her finger along the spines like she was reading gravestones. How long? The earliest file I found is from 2008, but the journal entries go back to 2012. 16 years. Sarah turned to look at me. Her eyes were wet. Dorothea, I'm so sorry. For what? For believing him. In 2020, he called me, told me you were fragile, that our friendship was stressful for you, that I should give you space, and I... She pressed her hand to her mouth. I believed him, because he was your husband, because he was a doctor. I thought I was helping you by staying away. He was very good at what he did, I said quietly. He made everyone believe, even me, sometimes. Sarah crossed the room and hugged me, hard and fierce. We stood there in the middle of Percival's meticulously organized evidence against me, 2 women in their 70s, holding each other up. "What do you need?" she asked when she finally pulled back. "Tell me what you need and I'll do it." "I need boxes," I said. "I have an appointment with an attorney tomorrow morning. I need to bring everything." We spent the next 4 hours systematically packing up Percival's office. Every binder, every file, every photograph. Sarah had brought a label maker, because of course she had, and we labeled each box with clinical precision. Medical files, financial records, correspondence, surveillance photos, behavioral logs. We worked mostly in silence. But every so often, Sarah would find something that made her stop. "Dottie, look at this." I came over. She was holding a file labeled Social Isolation Protocol. Inside was a list, a literal list. People to redirect away from DW Sarah Mitchell, encourages independence, questions my authority, Margaret Chen, divorced, bad influence, book club members, unnecessary social stimulation, to Rebecca Santos, DW's former physician, replaced with Dr. Patterson. Under each name were notes on how he'd accomplished the isolation. For Sarah, called directly, cited DW's anxiety. For Margaret, told DW that M was gossiping about her. For the book club, insisted meetings were too late, too tiring. For Dr. Santos, my former doctor, the one I'd seen for 20 years, the note read, "Switched DW to Patterson. Santos asked too many questions about medications." "He replaced your doctor," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "He isolated you from the one person who might have caught on." I took the file from her hands and added it to the box labeled Evidence of Coercive Control. That's what Grace Coleman had called it on the phone. Coercive control. A form of domestic abuse that doesn't leave bruises but leaves you just as trapped. By 4 in the afternoon, we had packed 12 boxes. They sat stacked by the office door like a timeline of my erasure year by year, carefully documented. "I'll drive you to the attorney's office tomorrow," Sarah said. "We'll take my car. We can fit all of these." "Thank you." She squeezed my hand. "I'm not going anywhere this time. I don't care who tells me to." That evening I called my son, Daniel. The conversation was harder than the one with Evelyn. Daniel had always been more like his father, logical, controlled, skeptical of emotional reactions. "Mom," Evelyn called me. "She said you found some things in Dad's office that upset you." "That's one way to put it. Look, I know you're grieving, and I know Dad could be difficult. But Evelyn said you're accusing him of some pretty serious things. Fraud, conspiracy. I just think maybe you should take a breath before—" "Daniel," I interrupted. "3 months ago you called me, and I answered. You asked what time it was. Do you remember?" Silence. "You were in Texas. It was 2 in the morning your time. Midnight my time. You asked me why I'd called you in the middle of the night. But I hadn't called you, Daniel. You had called me. I answered because you were my son and I was worried something was wrong. I don't... Your father told you I had called you. That I'd woken you up asking what time it was. That I was confused. And you believed him because why wouldn't you? But I have the phone records now, Daniel. I found them in his files. You called me, not the other way around. He lied to you to make you think I was losing my mind." I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. "How many other things did he lie about?" I asked quietly. "How many times did he twist something innocent into evidence that I was sick?" "Mom," his voice cracked. "If what you're saying is true—" "It is true, and I'm going to prove it. I have an attorney. I have evidence. 12 boxes of it. Your father spent years building a case to have me declared incompetent so he could take everything. The only reason I'm not in a nursing home right now, with Robert controlling every aspect of my life, is because your father died before he could file the paperwork." Daniel was quiet for a long time. Then, "What do you need from me?" "I need you to believe me, both of you. I need my children to know that their mother isn't crazy, that she never was." "I'm flying out this weekend," he said. "Evelyn, too. We should have come back sooner, after the funeral. We should have stayed." "You're coming now," I said. "That's what matters." Tigged. Grace Coleman's office was in a renovated Victorian in the Mission District, painted a cheerful yellow that seemed almost defiant. Sarah and I arrived at 9 in the morning, the back of her SUV loaded with boxes. Grace met us at the door. She was in her early 50s, black, with silver streaks in her natural hair, and the kind of steady, assessing gaze that made you feel both seen and believed. She'd been doing this work for 25 years, her website said. Elder abuse, financial exploitation, coercive control in long-term relationships. "Mrs. Wycliffe," she said, shaking my hand firmly, "let's get you sorted out." Her conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows and a table long enough for all 12 boxes. We unpacked them methodically while Grace's paralegal, a sharp-eyed young woman named Amanda, photographed and logged everything. Grace started with the Declaration of Incapacity. She read it twice, her expression growing darker. "These doctors," she said, "Bradley, Zhao, Patterson, did any of them ever examine you formally? Cognitive tests, neurological exams?" "Never. Dr. Zhao was at a Christmas party once. She asked me a few questions while we were eating dinner. That's it." Grace made a note. "That's medical fraud. They signed a legal document declaring you mentally incompetent without ever conducting an examination. That's grounds for losing their licenses." She moved to the correspondence folder, reading through the emails between Percival and the doctors. With each page, her jaw tightened. "Patient referrals in exchange for signing off on a fraudulent diagnosis. This is," she looked up at me, "Mrs. Wycliffe, this is one of the most clear-cut cases of elder abuse conspiracy I've seen. Your husband was essentially trafficking in your autonomy." "Can we stop it?" Sarah asked. "The will gives everything to a trust managed by his brother." "We're going to do more than stop it," Grace said. "We're going to dismantle it completely. The will was executed under fraudulent pretenses. If we can prove that Percival created a false narrative of your incompetence, we can argue that the entire estate plan was designed to exploit you. That's undue influence. That voids the will." She pulled out a legal pad and started writing. "Here's what we're going to do. First, we file a challenge to the will in probate court. Second, we report these 3 doctors to the California Medical Board for fraud and medical malpractice. Third, we investigate Robert's role. If he knew about this conspiracy, and based on what you found he did, then he's complicit in elder financial abuse. That's a crime." "How long will this take?" I asked. "Medical board moves faster than probate court. We could have a hearing within 2 to 3 weeks. The probate challenge will take longer, maybe 2 to 3 months. But the good news is that once we file, everything freezes. Robert can't touch the estate until this is resolved." Grace looked at me over her reading glasses. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Are you prepared for this to get ugly? Robert will fight back. He'll claim you're unstable, that you're grieving and confused. He might try to use your husband's files against you. This is going to be public. People will know." I thought about the locked door, about 52 years of being told I was confused, too sensitive, not capable of understanding, about the photographs taken without my knowledge, about the medications prescribed to fix problems I didn't have. "Let them know," I said. "I'm done hiding." Grace smiled. "Good. Then let's go to war." The medical board hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. In that time, Grace and Amanda built our case like architects constructing a building. Every piece of evidence precisely placed, every argument reinforced. They interviewed me for hours, going through the timeline of Percival's control. When did the isolation start? When did he take over the finances? When did the medications begin? They documented everything, creating a narrative that was damning in its clarity. Dr. Bradley tried to avoid the hearing. He filed a motion to dismiss, claiming he'd acted in good faith based on a colleague's assessment. Grace shut that down in 2 pages of legal writing that essentially called him a liar and a fraud. The hearing was held in a conference room in downtown San Francisco. Present, the 3 doctors, their attorneys, a 5-person medical board panel, Grace, Amanda, and me. I dressed carefully that morning. Navy suit, pearl earrings Percival had given me for our 30th anniversary, hair done, makeup subtle. I looked like exactly what I was. A competent, articulate woman in her 70s who'd been systematically gaslit by her husband and his medical colleagues. The medical board chair, Dr. Patricia Kim, called the hearing to order at 10 a.m. Grace presented first. She had prepared a PowerPoint, something I found both amusing and effective. The first slide was the Declaration of Incapacity with the 3 doctors' signatures highlighted. "This document," Grace said, "declares Mrs. Dorothea Wycliffe mentally incompetent. It was signed by 3 licensed physicians. Not one of them ever examined Mrs. Wycliffe. Not one of them conducted a cognitive test, a neurological exam, or any formal assessment of her mental capacity." She clicked to the next slide, the email from Dr. Bradley. Dr. Bradley agreed to diagnose Mrs. Wycliffe in exchange for patient referrals. This is the definition of a kickback scheme. He traded his medical ethics for business. Click. The email from Dr. Zhao. Dr. Zhao acknowledged that the evidence was subjective, but signed anyway because Dr. Wycliffe was a colleague and friend. This is not medicine. This is fraud. Click. The email from Dr. Patterson. Dr. Patterson signed in exchange for golf and stories. He didn't even pretend to review medical evidence. Grace let that sit for a moment before clicking to the next slide, a timeline of Percival's documentation, the behavioral logs, the photographs, the intercepted letters. Mrs. Wycliffe's husband spent 16 years building a false medical narrative to justify taking control of her assets after his death. These 3 doctors enabled that fraud by lending their medical licenses to a conspiracy. They violated their Hippocratic oath. They violated California medical ethics standards. And they victimized a woman who'd done nothing wrong except trust her husband. Dr. Bradley's attorney stood up. Dr. Bradley relied in good faith on the assessment of a respected colleague. Dr. Wycliffe was not a psychiatrist, Grace interrupted. He was not a neurologist. He had no specialization in cognitive disorders. He was an internist who retired 15 years ago. Dr. Bradley knew, or should have known, that his assessment was worthless without a proper examination. The board members were making notes. I could see their expressions shifting from neutral to troubled. "I'd like to call Mrs. Wycliffe to speak," Grace said. I stood up on shaky legs and walked to the front of the room. Dr. Kim gestured to a chair facing the panel. "Mrs. Wycliffe," she said kindly, "can you tell us, in your own words, about your experience?" I took a breath, looked at the 3 doctors sitting across the room. Bradley wouldn't meet my eyes. Zhao looked uncomfortable. Patterson just looked old and sad. "My husband locked a door in our house for 52 years, I began. "I wasn't allowed to go in. He told me it was patient files, confidential work. I believed him because I loved him, and because I thought that's what marriage meant, trusting each other." My voice was steady. I'd practiced this with Grace. "When he died, I opened that door. Inside I found files about me. Thousands of pages. Photographs he'd taken of me without my permission. Medical notes claiming I was mentally ill. Notes based on things like crying when he canceled our anniversary trip, or asking why I didn't see bank statements anymore. Normal reactions to his controlling behavior, reframed as symptoms of disease." I looked directly at Dr. Bradley. "In 2019, my husband prescribed me anti-anxiety medication. I didn't know why I needed it. I wasn't anxious, or at least I wasn't until he convinced me I should be. He told me I was hysterical because I was upset that he'd made a major decision without consulting me. That wasn't hysteria. That was a normal reaction. But he prescribed me medication anyway. And you, Dr. Bradley, signed off on it without ever meeting me." Dr. Bradley shifted in his seat. I turned to Dr. Zhao. "You met me once at a dinner party. You asked if I ever forgot where I put my keys. I laughed and said, "Doesn't everyone?" You wrote that down as evidence of cognitive decline, but you never told me you were evaluating me. You never conducted any tests. You just had a casual conversation over dinner and used it to sign a legal document declaring me incompetent. Dr. Zhao looked down at her hands. I looked at the board. I'm not sick. I've never been sick. My husband created an illness so he could control me, and these 3 doctors helped him do it. They signed papers they should never have signed. They took his word over evidence because he was their colleague, their friend, their business connection. And they never once thought to actually talk to me. I felt my voice crack slightly. I spent years doubting myself, thinking maybe I was forgetful, maybe I was confused, maybe I was the problem. My husband told me that, and doctors reinforced it, and eventually I almost believed it. But I wasn't the problem. The problem was a man who was so terrified of losing control that he tried to take away my mind, my autonomy, my right to exist as a full person. I looked at each board member in turn. I'm asking you to hold these doctors accountable, not for revenge, but because if they did this to me, they could do it to someone else. Some other woman who trusts her husband, who trusts her doctors, who doesn't have boxes of evidence to prove what was done to her. I sat back down. The room was silent. Dr. Kim looked at the other board members. Some kind of silent communication passed between them. "We'll take a 30-minute recess," she announced, "and then reconvene for questions." The questions went on for 2 hours. They asked me about specific incidents Percival had documented. They asked about the medications, the timeline, the isolation from friends. They asked about my current mental state. Had I been evaluated since Percival's death? "Yes," I said. My attorney arranged for an independent neuropsychological evaluation. The doctor found no evidence of cognitive decline, dementia, or any mental illness. I'm a 73-year-old woman with normal age-appropriate memory and cognitive function. Grace submitted the evaluation report. They asked the doctors to defend their actions. Dr. Bradley tried to maintain that he'd acted in good faith. Dr. Zhao admitted she perhaps should have been more thorough. Dr. Patterson said very little, which was probably wise. At 4:30, Dr. Kim announced they would deliberate and issue a ruling within 1 week. Grace, Sarah, and I went to a bar across the street. We ordered wine and sat in a booth by the window, watching the San Francisco fog roll in. "You were incredible," Sarah said. "Watching you up there? That was the Dottie I remember. Strong, clear, not taking any shit." "How do you think it went?" I asked Grace. She swirled her wine. "Honestly, I think we eviscerated them." The board looked appalled, but I never make predictions. Medical boards can be unpredictable, especially when it involves going after other doctors. But we have a chance. We have more than a chance. We have truth on our side. That doesn't always win, but it should. Dad. The ruling came down 6 days later via email. I was sitting in my kitchen, my house still for now, when my phone buzzed. Decision from California Medical Board. Bradley, Zhao, Patterson. My hands shook as I opened it. Dr. Alan Bradley. License suspended for 2 years, $75,000 fine. Mandatory ethics retraining. Formal reprimand on permanent record for engaging in medical fraud and kickback scheme. Dr. Helen Zhao. Formal reprimand, $25,000 fine. 1 year probation. Mandatory ethics retraining for failure to conduct proper evaluation before signing medical documents. Dr. James Patterson. Formal reprimand, $25,000 fine. 1 year probation. Mandatory ethics retraining for negligent medical practice. Additional, the board has referred the case to the district attorney's office for potential criminal investigation regarding conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse. I read it 3 times. Then I called Grace. "We won," she said. She sounded like she was smiling. "Phase 1 complete. Now we go after Robert." The probate hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Robert, it turned out, had been busy. He'd filed documents trying to expedite the trust, claiming I was distraught and making irrational decisions in my grief. He'd even lined up a psychiatrist, a new one, not Bradley, to evaluate me. Grace shut that down with a single filing that included the medical board decision and my independent evaluation. "Nice try," she said when she told me about it. "But we've established you're competent." He can't argue otherwise now. The day of the hearing, Daniel and Evelyn came with me. They'd spent the previous week at the house, going through everything I'd found, seeing their father's files, understanding slowly and painfully what had been done. Daniel cried when he read the phone records showing he'd called me, not the other way around. Evelyn sat in silence for an hour after reading the social isolation protocol that described how to cut me off from anyone who might question Percival's control. They were grieving twice, once for their father's death, and once for the father they thought they knew. "We should have seen it," Evelyn said the night before the hearing. We were sitting in the living room, the curtains open, lights on, everything Percival would have hated. "He was your father," I said gently. "You loved him. That's not wrong. But we believed him over you. He was very convincing. That's what people like him do." Daniel looked at me. He had his father's eyes, but not his father's coldness. "What happens now, after the hearing?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But whatever happens, I'm not going back to who I was." That door is closed now. The probate hearing was held in a downtown courtroom, smaller than I expected, wood-paneled and formal. The judge was the Honorable Patricia Mendoza, a Latina woman in her 50s with a reputation for being tough on elder abuse cases. Robert sat at the defendant's table with his attorney, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit. Robert looked smaller than I remembered. Diminished. When our eyes met, he looked away quickly. Grace presented our case methodically. The fraudulent declaration of incapacity, the medical board ruling, the conspiracy between Percival and the doctors, the will that would have stripped me of all autonomy. "Your Honor," Grace said, "this will was not created out of concern for Mrs. Wycliffe's well-being. It was created as the final step in a decades-long campaign of coercive control." Mr. Percival Wycliffe manufactured a false medical narrative, recruited 3 doctors to legitimize it, and structured his estate to ensure that even after his death, he would control his wife's life. Robert Wycliffe knew about this plan and agreed to participate in exchange for $50,000, paid 6 weeks before Percival's death. Robert's attorney stood. "Your Honor, my client was simply agreeing to serve as executor, a role he took on out of family obligation. A role he took on for $50,000, Grace interrupted. "I have the wire transfer records. August 15th, 2024. Memo line, consulting fee. Consulting for what exactly? The trust hadn't even been activated yet." Judge Mendoza looked at Robert. "Mr. Wycliffe, I'd like to hear from you directly. Did you know about the declaration of incapacity before your brother died?" Robert's attorney whispered something to him. Robert shook his head. "Mr. Wycliffe," Judge Mendoza said, her voice sharp, "I asked you a question." Robert stood slowly. He looked pale. Yes. Yes, I knew." "And did you believe Mrs. Wycliffe was actually mentally incompetent?" Silence. "Mr. Wycliffe?" Robert's voice cracked. "Percival told me she was. He showed me files. He said she needed protection." "But did you believe it?" Judge Mendoza pressed. "You'd known Mrs. Wycliffe for 52 years. Had you observed any cognitive decline? Any inability to manage her affairs?" Robert looked at me, then down at his hands. "No." The courtroom went silent. "You knew she was competent," Judge Mendoza said slowly, "and you agreed to participate in a scheme to control her assets anyway, for $50,000. "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like, Mr. Wycliffe?" Robert's shoulders slumped. "Percival was my brother. He said it was for her own good, that she'd be happier with someone else making decisions. He made it sound like we were helping her. By taking away her autonomy, Judge Mendoza said, by making her a prisoner in her own life. Robert didn't answer. Judge Mendoza looked down at her notes, then at me. Mrs. Wycliffe, would you like to say anything? I stood up. I hadn't planned to speak, but suddenly I needed to. Your Honor, my husband didn't protect me. He didn't care for me. He erased me. He built a story where I was weak so that he could feel strong. He told everyone I was confused so that no one would listen when I spoke. And I'm asking you to give me back my name. I'm not a child. I'm not a patient. I'm his widow. And I survived him. Judge Mendoza nodded slowly. She wrote something down, then looked up. I'm going to rule from the bench, she announced. I've heard enough. My heart stopped. The will is hereby declared void due to fraud and undue influence. The declaration of incapacity is invalid and will be expunged from all records. All assets of the Percival Wycliffe estate are to be transferred immediately to Mrs. Dorothea Wycliffe as the surviving spouse with full autonomy and control. I felt Sarah grip my hand. Furthermore, Judge Mendoza continued, I am referring this case to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of elder financial abuse conspiracy. Mr. Robert Wycliffe, you should expect to hear from them. She looked at Robert, her expression hard. You betrayed your sister-in-law for money. You participated in a scheme to strip a competent woman of her rights. That's not family obligation, Mr. Wycliffe. That's exploitation. And in this court, we don't tolerate it. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through the courtroom. This matter is concluded. Six months later, I stood in what used to be Percival's office. The room looked different now. I'd had the walls painted a soft butter yellow. The heavy curtains were gone, replaced with sheer panels that let in floods of California sunshine. The filing cabinets were gone. The binders were gone. The desk was gone. In their place, a long table surrounded by comfortable chairs. Bookshelves filled with books about healing, about women's rights, about reclaiming your life. A small kitchen area in the corner for coffee and tea. The sign on the door read, The Wycliffe Room, a safe space for women. Today was the third meeting of the support group I'd started. 15 women, ages ranging from 52 to 81, sat in a circle. Some I knew from around town. Others had found me through the website Sarah had helped me build. All of them had stories about control, about manipulation, about being told they were too emotional, too confused, too old to understand. Thank you for coming, I said, taking my seat. For those who are new, I'm Dorothea. This is a space where you can speak without being questioned, where you can feel without being diagnosed, where you can exist without being managed. A woman in her 60s raised her hand tentatively. Her name was Patricia. How do you know? She asked. How do you know if it's abuse or if he's just concerned? My husband says I'm bad with money, that I should let him handle it. He says I forget things, and sometimes I do forget things. How do I know if he's right? I leaned forward. Does he ask what you want, or does he tell you what you need? Patricia's eyes filled with tears. He tells me? Does he explain his decisions, or does he expect you to accept them? He gets angry when I ask questions, says I'm being difficult. I nodded. That's how you know. Love asks, love explains, love partners with you, control tells you, control manages you. Control makes you doubt yourself until you forget you ever knew how to think. Around the circle, women were nodding. Some were crying. Sarah sat in the back corner, not part of the circle, but present, supportive. She came to every meeting. My children came sometimes too, still learning, still processing, but trying. The garden outside the window was full of roses now. Red ones, pink ones, yellow ones that climbed up a new trellis Daniel had helped me install. Percival had never let me plant roses. Too much work, he'd said, too much maintenance. You wouldn't be able to keep up. But I'd planted them anyway, and they were thriving. After the meeting, as women filed out, hugging each other, exchanging phone numbers, Patricia approached me. What you said about the door being unlocked, she said. That we just have to turn the handle. Is it really that simple? I thought about the locked door I'd lived with for 52 years, about the night I'd called the locksmith, about the moment I'd stepped inside and seen the truth. Simple? I said. No, it's the hardest thing you'll ever do, but it's also the only thing that matters. Because once that door is open, once you see what's on the other side, the truth about who you are and who you've always been, you can't unsee it, and you can't go back. Patricia nodded slowly. I think I'm ready to call a locksmith. Then call one, I said. And if you need someone to stand with you when the door opens, call me. She hugged me, fierce and grateful, and left. I stood in the Wycliffe room as the afternoon light slanted through the windows, making patterns on the yellow walls. This room that had been a prison was now a sanctuary. This house that had been a cage was now a home. I was 73 years old. My hair was silver, my hands were spotted with age, and I lived alone. But I wasn't lonely. I was free. And that made all the difference. Determined. Epilogue. The letter came 3 months after the probate hearing. It was from Dr. Helen Zhao, handwritten, addressed to me personally. Dear Mrs. Wycliffe, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to read this. But I needed to write it anyway. I signed that document because I was lazy, because I trusted a colleague without doing my due diligence, because it was easier to believe your husband than to do the hard work of actually examining you. I told myself I was helping, but I was really just taking the path of least resistance. The medical board suspension is nothing compared to what I did to you. I helped a man cage his wife. I used my medical degree to enable abuse. That will haunt me for the rest of my life. I don't know if this matters, but I've started volunteering at a women's shelter, teaching classes on recognizing medical gaslighting, trying to make sure other doctors don't make the mistakes I made. It doesn't undo what I did to you, but maybe it can prevent it from happening to someone else. I'm sorry. Deeply, truly sorry. Helen Zhao, I read the letter twice. Then I did something that surprised me. I wrote back. Dear Dr. Zhao, thank you for your letter. You're right. I can't forgive you yet. Maybe I never will. What you did was wrong, and the consequences of it almost destroyed my life. But I appreciate that you're trying to do better. That matters. Not for me, but for the next woman whose husband tells her she's confused. For the next patient who needs a doctor to actually see her, not just defer to a man's version of her. Keep volunteering. Keep teaching. Keep making sure other doctors know that a woman's voice matters as much as her husband's opinion. That's not forgiveness, but it's acknowledgement that people can change. Dorothea Wycliffe. I mailed it the next day. Because here's what I'd learned in those 6 months since opening the locked door. Healing isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing who you want to be on the other side of trauma. It's about deciding that the person who hurt you won't be the one who defines your future. Percival had spent 52 years trying to make me small, trying to convince the world, and me, that I was incompetent, confused, incapable. But he was wrong. I'd always been capable. I'd always been strong. I'd just forgotten it for a while, because he'd convinced me to doubt the truth I'd always known. Now I remembered, and I wasn't going to forget again. Damn, if you're reading this, and if any of this sounds familiar, if you have a voice in your life that tells you you're too tired, too confused, too old to understand the bills, too emotional to make decisions, listen to me. Check the locks. Open the mail. Ask the questions they tell you not to ask, because they will call you difficult. They will call you crazy. They will tell you you're not remembering things correctly, that you're being irrational, that you need help. But darling, that's just the sound of them losing control. Come home to yourself. The door is unlocked. You just have to turn the handle.